Almost everybody back, so maybe we can. Shall we start anew?
Yes.
With Roman 4, what are the ends that are also duties? They are one's own perfection and the happiness of others. Tell me why. There's a small argument about that. Why isn't there a duty to perfect somebody else? Or why is there a duty to make oneself happy? Why is it that we have a duty for one's own perfection and for the happiness of others, and not the other way around? I like these moments.
You cannot.
My Buddhist moments. Silence. Listening myself.
You cannot input in the other the perfection.
No, why not?
Because it's a man that you can put on first.
Very smart argument. Very smart.
Can you get yourself pure?
But maybe you can perfect your argumentation.
It's a contradiction. The perfection of the other. To why is a contradiction?
Why? Yeah, why? Why? Contradiction. He gives the answer. The answer is yeah.
Yes. There's no necessitation in this case if I'm looking for my own happiness.
Yes.
So I think that the answer maybe is in this notion of necessitation.
The first answer is where there is no necessitation, there can be no obligation. Obligation presupposes necessitation. And what is true about your own happiness? There is no necessitation because of what?
Because of happiness, we subject with medicine.
Yeah, everybody does long for his own happiness.
Yes.
So when you do something, it doesn't make sense to take you under obligation to do that. If you're doing homework, then it doesn't make sense to obligate you to do homework. If you do exercise, then it doesn't make sense that somebody comes in and says you have to make exercises. Just because the happiness is the natural end, which comes with your anthropology, so to speak, it doesn't make sense to necessitate to do what you by yourself already do. You're totally right about that, so to speak. So obligation always means that something comes in which is not done by you as a natural being, so to speak. But of course you can discuss with Kant about that. You can say, well, maybe there is a duty for your own happiness in cases in which you not so much are looking for your happiness. Maybe you can be put under obligation because maybe people don't look for that. Maybe they are desperate. Maybe they say, well, I really don't care about myself either, about my happiness. Everything happens to me. Imagine you decide to become a Buddhist. And the question is, you are looking for happiness just in silence or something like that, in not involving with the world, or like a Taoist in Chinese philosophy, religion, Wu Wei, not acting at all. Do nothing. That's the way it is. And Kant might say, no, that seems strange to me because, say it other way. Kant claims that our happiness is our natural aim, and this seems to imply that he believes that people are acting as a means for becoming happy. And he doesn't have maybe a space for a happiness which does not rely on acting. So the idea that you find your happiness in not acting at all seems to be a conception which doesn't fit with the Kantian conception, I would say. So the idea that you find your happiness in, just doing nothing and try to get rid of yourself, like in Buddhist meditation, is something which doesn't fit with this conception of happiness. Not acting, just meditating, trying to get rid of yourself, of your selfhood, is something which is contradictory to the Kantian conception. Because you believe it's all about me. It's all about myself. It's all about my proper self. That the proper object of your being in the world is to get rid of the world and therefore to get rid of yourself is nothing, he has no place for that. So if you were a Buddhist or some sort of Buddhist or maybe a Taoist or something like that, and you are striving for getting rid of yourself, so to speak, then you have a problem with the Kantian theory. Because this is a theory for people acting in the world, striving for happiness, going out to Belo Horizonte or Rio and making fun. So in this case, if you go to Kant's lectures and raise your hands saying to Kant, well, Kant, I think the best thing for me is not acting, getting rid of myself, he might say, well, maybe you have the duty not to get rid of yourself. And therefore the general claim that there is no duty to promote one's own happiness might not be correct. So at least you can make a philosophical argument about it, you see. But in general, Kant just believes that your happiness is what you are looking for, because you have inclinations and subjective ends and so on and so forth. Okay, but what about the perfection of other people? Why are you not under the obligation to promote my perfection? The last sentence of paragraph.
I think that when Kant says in the paragraph, the second paragraph, that the other, or the external, we cannot put an end to your reason from outside. The end is something that
you have to act on.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's about you and your ends, so to speak. And it's a capability to act on certain ends and so on and so forth. Because nobody can do that instead of mine, I have to do it myself. It's like learning to write correctly Portuguese or learn a language or to learn how to multiply 3 times 4 or whatever. You have to do it yourself. Nobody else can do the job for you, so to speak. So nobody else can lead the lives you are leading, so to speak. And nobody else can act on principles and except you. And therefore, perfecting yourself means to have a certain refined and more refined ability to act on certain ends. And it's all about you, so to speak. Other people can help you, of course. But this is, why doesn't he talk about perfection? He would say, if I say as a governor or as a teacher, am I not under the obligation to do what makes it easier for you to perfect yourself? Isn't it an indirect duty for your perfection? Maybe this is existing. So maybe there is no direct duty for me to contribute you to your perfection, but maybe an indirect one. Or maybe he would say, I have the duty to prepare my classes, whatever, becoming smarter and smarter to be sure that you can become smarter and smarter, that I don't talk nonsense to you and so on, pretending that it is true. And that might be falling under the duty of promoting your happiness as well. I don't know. Maybe we would say it's promoting your happiness indirectly, so to speak. Because in teaching you how to think or how to behave in certain environments or seeking some competences or whatever, you will be able to promote your own happiness in a better way and to improve your perfection as well. I don't know. So you can talk about that different perspectives. What does it mean to promote happiness? Does it include?
I'd like to ask what is mean with happiness? The satisfaction that you are moral, or happiness in the sense of what we imagine can be your happiness?
He has an answer to that.
Well-being,
It's in Roman 8. You see, he goes back, or he comes back to this question in more detail in Roman 8, expositions of duties of virtue as white duties. And first of all, he talks about one's own perfection, and then he talks about the happiness of others. And he distinguishes between two levels, natural welfare and moral well-being. So the duty to promote the well-being of others includes natural well-being and moral well-being. Natural well-being means that I take care of your subjective ends, whatever ends that might be. And the other one is you find on 394. Yeah, the happiness of others, moral well-being. And there it says, here, but it is my duty. But it is my duty to refrain from doing anything that, considering the nature of a human being, could tempt him to do something for which his conscience could afterwards pain him, to refrain from what is called giving scandal. So I could offer you $1 million to kill my neighbor. And then I'm tempting you because you like the idea of having $1 million. And then you are tempted and do something wrong, you kill this guy. And afterwards you will have a bad consciousness and will lose, so to speak, the feeling, the respect for yourself and so on and so forth. So on the one side you have the duty to promote the subjective ends of other people, for instance making you able to make the widest possible use of your freedom of choice. So if you do not know how to handle a car, how to use a plane, how to use a bicycle, then you are not so much free than another guy who can do that. If you are not in the position to buy food for yourself, then you rely on other people, and therefore if you have learned that, it makes easier life better for you. And here it's, so to speak, negative. This is a positive duty, I have to do something. And this is a negative one. I shouldn't refrain from doing something. I shouldn't offer you some things. I shouldn't go to you with some places where your character will be in distress. I shouldn't offer you money to go to dwarf with me or whatever. Something like that. So this falls under the concept of a moral happiness. More than afterwards you will be paid. Oh, I killed somebody. I missed to pay taxes.
I have a question. Suppose that I have a natural inclination to be sadness, to be depressed, And
Like
it's
me.
my no, not like that. And it's my responsibility to be happy. Nobody can be happy for me, and I have to fight against my natural
That's the point,
inclination.
yeah.
To then, I think that we can put our own happiness as
As a duty, yeah.
as a duty.
Yeah. That's what I was trying to say before. That might be a case. And the thing is, some passages in which he says actually that we do not have a direct duty to do so, but an indirect one. Because, I don't know where the passage is, but I'm sure that there is one passage. Maybe not in this book, but I think it's in this book. He says there's an indirect moral duty to promote one's own happiness, because if you are unhappy, depressive, and so on and so forth, then you cannot fulfill your moral duties. You see, if you are depressed and don't like the people and don't enjoy life, then you won't be in the position to promote the happiness of other people as well. And then you cannot, so to speak, be cultivated as a full human being. And this is introduced as an indirect duty. Something like, there are indirect duties against animals as well. So, and I remember a passage in the anthropology lecture where he says, we know from experience that if you do some violent work, like the what's called butcher, if you are going, I don't know, it's true probably, if you're being a butcher and you kill every day animals and eat them and see all the blood and so on and so forth, afterwards your character will be brutalized or whatever. So don't do that. It's a message of God. It's probably, I'm sure that it's not right, but you can imagine going to war. And then we know from experience that people being in war, serving as soldiers, change their characters. You become used to certain kinds of actions you would be disgusted of as a normal being. We know that from the Second World War, some soldiers being maybe teachers for Latin and Greek, humanists teaching at school, and then they went to war. And then they described how their character really changes over the years and so on and so forth. So Kant would say, don't go to those, or don't be part of situations in which there is a good chance that your character will change, and afterwards you will lose what he's talking about later on in this book, your moral feelings and your sensibility and your compassion. And there's an indirect duty, he claims in the Doctrine of Virtue, to go in situation which cultivates your moral feelings. That is to say, go where the poor people are and feel with them and so on and so forth. To, so to speak, prepare the way of acting morally. That's his idea. So anyway, so the question is it a direct duty to promote one's happiness, or it's an indirect duty to promote one's happiness? And Kant would say it's indirect one, but maybe you can imagine cases where you would say it's a direct one, but Kant would say, why isn't it a direct duty? He would say, well, why should pure reason care about your happiness? Why does morality care about your happiness? Why is it important in moral terms that you are happy? Aristotle would say, that's all about happiness, about the true happiness. If you are not, do not lead a happy life, then you miss something important. You are not a human being at all. So living in the German woods 400 years before Christ means that you have no chance really to live a good life. You need to polish, you need to know some Greek, you need to have the chances to take part in a certain kind of politics and discussions, and you need a marketplace, and the city shouldn't be too small or too big. So living in Belo Horizonte, according to Aristotle, would mean we miss it all because the city is too big. There's no chance to gather together and talk about the decisive affairs whatsoever. Imagine even worse. Yeah, São Paulo. Guys are even worse. Okay, whatever. So we miss something. So without happiness, it's all about happiness. True happiness, of course, not the happiness of the. But in Kant, one would say happiness as such is part. Happiness as such is part of our natural history. And pure reason doesn't care about natural history. One would say pure reason cares about freedom, and your happiness only becomes a matter relevant for pure reason if it has a connection with your freedom. So you have to have some moral perspective on your happiness. And Kant would say the moral perspective comes in if your unhappiness is the cause of making it impossible for you to act morally. But then, to make the story more complicated, happiness is not just, as I said before, part of natural history. There's also the longing of pure reason, what will be the effect, and so on and so forth. We're really so strong, or striving, of asking for happiness, and we are even creating another world in which there will be a God, and so on and so forth. So it's complicated. But at the beginning, one could say, why bother about happiness? It's all about the moral law.
I think perhaps in this case of depression and something like that, the problem is not happiness, but to be sad. You must have a minimum of condition, physical condition, that you can be moral.
Yes, of course. Yeah. That's the point. And then, therefore, it would be indirect duty.
Mm-hmm.
You say, if you do not take actions to prevent you for being depressive the whole day through and not in the position to act, because if you have the chance to overcome this depression, you have to take it. If you haven't the chance, of course, you're bad luck. It's like it is.
And I think it's valid for all natural states. Hungry.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Homeless.
You have to care about that.
As a condition to be free, condition, not a minimum of basis to be.
But one could say, happiness is a big word. You can give an interpretation of happiness which means that happiness is really big, a big concept.
Well-being.
Yeah, well-being. But Kant sometimes thinks of happiness as being, so to speak, a small concept. It just means being able to fulfill one's desires.
Mm-hmm.
This is not, so to speak, flying through the room and being so happy through and through. But it just means here's your desire, and you manage to get it, to fulfill it, and then you are so to speak happy. It's not the only concept of happiness in Kant, but it's a basic one. This is the Hobbesian one. It stems from what Hobbes says. The good is the action which realizes our ends, and then you are, so to speak, happy. And then comes another desire, and you fulfill this desire, and then comes another desire. So you're all the time driven by desires, and Kant takes that up. He says, well, that's true. There will never be a state on earth in which you can claim that you rest in happiness, so to speak, that you are enlightened in happiness, sitting on the mountain and being now happy forever. So the Aristotelian idea that you can reach a situation or go into a situation which lasts maybe until the end of your life in which you are happy, doesn't apply to the Kantian philosophy. Obviously, you have to do something in Aristotle. You cannot leave the polis, then you and live in the Germanic woods or whatever. That will break down if the people from Sparta invading your country, your city, then you might be in distress, having a good life as well. but in general you reach a situation in which you can claim to be happy and you do something, take part in a praxis, and then you will be happy. But in Kant it's not so this big concept of praxis or being part of the polis, but it's more, so to speak, atomistic. It's about your individual actions. There's no perfect happiness. Interestingly, here in this book, which really adds to his conception as such, he adds something which has a value in itself, which Kant didn't mention in this way, at least in the groundwork or before. You find that, where do we find it? The idea is that your ability to make use of your power of choice has a moral worth in itself. So the ability to have the power of choosing different subjective ends, which seems to be part just of the natural history of yourself, has also a moral meaning. That is to say, why I am under the obligation, or what does it mean to promote your happiness? It promotes, it includes my duty to make sure that you in the future can decide between options which you wouldn't have without my support, so to speak. It's in, yes, it's on a little before that, on the first, at the beginning of 8, Roman 8. Yes. Here it's about natural perfection. Yeah, this one. So it says, natural perfection is the cultivation of any capacities, whatever for furthering ends set forth by reason. That this is the duty, and so in itself an end, and that the cultivation of our capacities, even without regard for the advantage it affords us, is based on an unconditional moral imperative rather than a conditional pragmatic one, can be shown in this way. Now the argument comes. The capacity to set oneself an end, any end whatsoever, is what characterizes humanity as distinguished from animality. The capacity to set oneself an end is what characterizes humanity. Hence, there is also bound up with the end of humanity in our own person, the rational will, and so the duty to make ourselves worthy of humanity by culture in general, by producing or promoting the capacity to realize all sorts of possible ends, so far as this is to be found in man himself. So the idea is, it's not just about moral ends. The capacity for me to choose things and to choose between different subjective ends is valued from a moral point of view. So I would perfect myself in learning more languages, in being able to run faster, in doing research on physics or medicine or biology. And this is a value pure reason itself puts on this capacity. It's what in former times in East Germany was called the all-developed socialist personality. You see something like that. You find it early Marx as well. In the morning you are maybe working, fishing, and in the evening you are shooting at beers, and in the evening you are reading Aristotle, something like that. So this is all about our natural ends, it is all about our natural history, so to speak, but pure reason wants us to be in the position to do so. So maximizing reason, or maximizing the power of choice, you can name it. So pure reason values just practical reason. You have pure practical reason and you have practical reason. Practical reason is the reason you apply to behave in the world, hypothetical imperatives and so on and so forth. And this idea is quite new. You can use this word maximizing rationality, or maximizing reason, or maximizing the power of making use of it. So, and this also applies to my duty for the happiness of others, because I have not only the duty to maximize my capability of setting myself subjective ends, I have also the duty to promote the choices you made. Also, I hate fishing. I should buy the equipment for my daughters if they want to go fishing. You see, that's the point, so to speak. And pure reason values there. Optimizing, maximizing our capacity to set ends. In some of his lecture notes, he introduces a concept called formal inclination. There are formal inclinations. This is strange because all inclinations are material ones. Inclinations mean to have desires. But in some of his lectures, he introduces the idea of formal inclination. He says the inclination to be a free human being is a formal one. It's just, so to speak, it stems from reason itself. We value our ability of choosing ends and more than anything else. It's above all, so to speak. So you, I don't know why, but going back to, yeah, we were in 4. So we discussed the question, duties, one's own perfection and the happiness of others, and then we have 5 clarification of these 2 concepts. He talks more about these concepts, and if we would go into more detail, we should take care of Wolf as well, because you know the first sentence here is down 87, 387, verse 387. The other verse. A little bit more, beginning, yeah. The word perfection is open to a good deal of misrepresentation. And you will be annoyed to be involved here, because perfection is the central concept of Leibnizian Wolfian philosophy. And he says, well, you know, people were talking about the impact of perfection, Vervollkommenheit, for decades. And there's a principle of perfection, Perfektheit, and so Kant says, it's a good deal of misinterpretation. That means I will give the right interpretation now. Stupid. I will do that for you.
And after me.
Das Wort Vollkommenheit ist mancher Missdeutung ausgesetzt. It's a good deal of misinterpretation. How funny. And then he says something about that. Talking about cultivation, quantitative and qualitative perfection. It's about the will, perfection, cultivating the will. In Wolf, it's not cultivating the will, it's cultivating reason. Because the will follows reason. Therefore, at first place, you have to take care of your reason. If you take care of your reason, you take care of your will. But there's no way of taking care of your will except independent of taking care of your reason, so to speak. Then the happiness of others, we had some arguments about that. Then, or do you have questions about that? Arguments, questions, reasons, hopes, criticisms, ideas, feelings?
Answer.
So, alles perfect. Everything is clear and distinct. So. Then it talks, in 6 it's about, again, the relation or the differences between the doctrine of right and ethics, and it says ethics does not give laws for actions, but only for maxims of actions. So it's a difference between ethics and the doctrine of virtue and the doctrine of right, which isn't that true, I must confess. It's not quite true what he is saying about the doctrine of right. Because if you look into the text, if you look onto the definition of what the concept of right is all about, he uses the concept of maxims there as well. So you can write a book about that.
But Heiner, the categorical imperative is a law, it's not a maxim.
It's not a maxim, no.
It's a law.
It's a law. It's a
The law of actions.
it's not the law. It's an imperative. That is to say, the categorical imperative is a sentence in which your obligation is expressed. And this obligation is expressed with reference to the moral law. And then the question is, as I was a student, I was thinking, what's the difference between the categorical imperative and the moral law? $99. That's a question.
Yes, because yesterday you said that it's the same. Imperative, categorical. Oh no, it's not you. It's João.
Yeah.
João. No, the first day.
We discussed the third part of work.
Work. Here?
Here,
Yeah, in the journal, the
On
first
Monday.
day.
On Monday. And
But you
This
were-
week I was
No, you are
present.
not here.
Oh, I see. That was the part, the Portuguese part. I'm not responsible for the It's a logic for its own. No. Come on, yeah.
yes.
What's the category?
Yes.
He always says the categorical imperative expresses your obligation to act in a certain way. So, and how does the categorical imperative do so? The categorical imperative can only do so in making reference to the moral law. What is a moral law? A law is a rule. A law is something which has to, this is causality. Rule, causality, and it comes with necessity. And it comes with generality. And you
And
can
obligation.
We're talking about the moral law. The moral law doesn't come with obligation as such. It can, and then it is formulated as a categorical imperative. But the moral law as such has nothing to do with obligation. Because of what? We will see later. Generality, Allgemeinheit. So you can write another book about what's the relation between generality and necessity. The moral law applies to something. What is the precondition for this application? You have to have some subject.
Not all?
This one is not a human being. Therefore, it more hands. And so. This is pure rational being. This is this is a pure rational being. So define according to Kant a pure rational being. It has two essential properties. The first one is it has, of course, reason. What is reason? Good question. What is reason? Reason always comes with necessity and generality. It comes with the concept of a law. No? This is reason, the general conception. And because it's not a theoretical God, but a practical one, it has will. These two things. So, now imagine this pure rational being having reason and will. And how can this being determine itself to action? Through its own nature. And this is not the nature of Amazonas region, but the nature of rationality, necessity and generality, causality, etc. This is proof. So, if this pure rational being it acts with necessity according to the principle of necessity. That is to say, the rule it follows, it follows, is the rule connected with the concept of generality, causality, necessity, of necessity and generality. In the way it's called causality. So, and then you can put here in cause and effect, and Leibniz will claim, of course, that this being is a cause of its own actions. Think about the third antinomy. So this is first mover. So this guy causes out of itself, or himself, or herself, actions. And this is a certain form of causality, because it's not natural causality. Natural causality, there is no first cause. There's always a cause of a cause of a cause of a cause. But this form of causality, according to Leibniz and according to Kant, comes with spontaneity. And spontaneity just means being your own cause. So this type of causality connected with a pure rational being is a causality which causes but is itself uncaused. And the way in which this being moves itself is via the rule of a causality which is described as a moral rule, because it comes with freedom. Freedom means being your own cause. Here you can put in freedom. It's a causality of freedom. But it's a freedom which doesn't contradict the concept of necessity. Freedom and necessity go together. So there's no problem of Leibnizian and Wolfgangian law. As for you, it is undifferent. So what do we have? We have explained the concept of the moral law. The moral law is the law of a being which is the cause of its own actions according to the nature of this being, which consists in necessity and generality, and therefore in its reason. Following a rule, the rule is the law, because it's necessary. Something like that. That's a moral law. The moral law is the rule a purely rational being follows and determine its own rationality with, so to speak. Okay. And now there comes another story. We haven't so much place left for that one. And this is us. Maybe you. Yeah? And this pure guy has a difficult life, as Eugenia mentions. Because on the one side, there's moral law, and on the other side we have something else. Here somehow is the power of choice. On the one side, the power of choice, because it's, so to speak, connected with freedom, doesn't fall under the law of nature. If it would fall under the law of nature, only it would be a power of choice being just part of nature, that is to say, there would be no morality left. So, the moral law becomes connected or transformed, that better, is transformed into a categorical imperative. That is to say, the concept of obligation is connected with the concept of the moral law, because this guy stands to himself in a certain relation. The one side, pure rationality, and everything applies to this guy, which applies to pure rational being, but on the other side, it's just human sensibility. And a sensibility, then the inclinations and so on and so on. And there's another form of causality. Causality of nature. And everything is determined there and so on and so forth. So it's in between. And the categorical imperative, so to speak, is the way in which reason addresses us as human beings, saying to us, we should act according to that form of causality which can and is described as a moral law, that is to say, as a law for beings which appear rational. So the categorical imperative is the expression of the moral law in terms of normativity or something. It expresses the obligation. Act as if you were in the sensible world a purely rational being. So apply this form of causality to the sensible world. This is what the categorical imperative expresses. Because, so to speak, our access, Kant claims in the critical practice, our access to the law of freedom is via the consciousness of the categorical imperative. Because we never have just the concept of the moral law, consciousness of the moral law, but it always comes with necessitation. We know that in certain situations we should act otherwise just because the moral law is given to us. And we know, we shouldn't. Because we sustain our freedom only in the empirical world if we follow the law which a good guy like God follows with necessities. And in the anthropology lecture and passages you find here and elsewhere, it talks about self-sustainment, I think it's in English, Selbsterhaltung, to sustain yourself. So morality is all about making sure that you don't lose yourself in the empirical world to the empirical world. Don't get lost in the world of your inclinations. Make sure that in the world of inclinations you follow those rules which sustain your rationality in this area. That's the idea. This is, so to speak, what pure reason wants you to do. And then in the Doctrine of Virtue introduces these ends as having, on the one side, a motivational impact, and on the other side, has some normative impact in terms of making it easier for you to recognize what duties there are for you. Because later on he introduces a general maxim of virtue in Roman 9 on page 395. He says there's a general maxim of the doctrine of virtue. There were no general maxim before and no general maxim after. So you have two types of general maxims. You have that one connected with radical evil, and here you have another one. Seldom, or it was seldom discussed before. So I think there's no place where he actually formulated the moral law. Never. Always in this. So we could try to do so. We could say, what is a moral law? What is a, to be easier, to start with an easier job, what is a natural law? So, what is a natural law? We have to look into the basic laws chapter in the Critique of Pure Reason, and there it says a natural law is every cause, there's a relation between cause and effect, and there is no first cause, but the cause is the effect of something else, and so on and so forth. So, and here he would claim that's the same with freedom, except that in causality of freedom there is spontaneity, and we regard ourselves as being the authors, the causes of our own actions. The causes which are not caused. That is specific about the moral law. It's not specific about us being nature. And if we decide not to act morally, then we give up, so to speak, determining ourselves, because then we let us being determined through nature. Then we let, so to speak, the necessity of nature come into our consciousness. Something like that. So, was it an answer to your question?
Thank you.
And so you can here add the concept of maxim and say, okay, this guy, we all, with respect to the sensible world, organize our field of action through maxims. Because we have rational concepts which have not the origin in pure rationality, rational concepts which make that possible. We know that an action is a mean for an end, for instance. The birds doesn't know that. We are acting on concepts. And then we realize that in this maxim, of course, there's talk about ends, about material forms and so on, material content and so on and so forth. And then he says, well, to make sure that this maxim complies to the form of the intelligible world, we have to look up the maxim, if the form matches the form of the intelligible world. And how do we do so? We take the law of nature form as an example, so to speak. We know what it means that natural laws have a form. And what means form in Kant? Generality and necessity, that's all. The form of a maxim means generality, necessity, nothing else. Form sometimes is defined in the literature of the time as being, so to speak, the essentia of something. So the contents can change, but the form stays. So the maxim, although some content of the maxim varies and changes, the maxim is still the same. Could be the same. So if the maxim passed the text, then you know that it is in conformity with the law in general, and because the moral law is the law, you can be sure that it is in conformity with the moral law. So this is idea that natural laws and the moral laws have something in common. And what they have in common is generality, necessity. And if you look at the maxim and look at them as possible laws of nature, and nature means here nature of our freedom, then they pass the text. And in the doctrine of virtue, something else comes in. It's not just the negative test. Like in the groundwork, looking, does the maxim pass or not pass? And then it follows from that positive and negative actions. But the main test is negative. Does it pass or not pass? And then from the past maxims follow positive or negative actions. I shouldn't lie, or I should help somebody in distress. But in the doctrine of virtue, it's not enough, so to speak. There is a new maxim, which is connected with ends which directly result from pure reason itself. because of two reasons. The first one is otherwise you would not be strong enough, and the other one is that he claims without those ends stemming from pure reason there would be no categorical imperative. And this is not quite convincing according to the ground truth, because as the ground truth you would say the categorical imperative is justified, although there are no ends given by pure reason, because I already exist as an entity itself. And that's enough. That's a reason. I know, I realize myself to exist in the intelligible world, and therefore I regard myself as being the cause of my action. That's the argument of the ground truth. In the third subsection of the third section of the ground truth, in which he says we regard the intelligible world as being the cause of the laws of the empirical world. And if we have access, if we realize ourselves to be members of the intelligible world, then we regard this intelligibility as being our proper self. And therefore we can regard ourselves as being the causes of actions in the empirical world. What was the question? The question was, what's the difference between the moral law and the categorical?
No, because we have in the sixth section saying that the edge does not give laws for actions, but only for
Yes.
maxims
Yeah.
for actions.
So the idea is that ethics, that you as a human being do not have direct access to concrete actions which are demanded by your or prohibited by your pure rationality, but only via your maxims. So if you would be a being without having maxims, then you wouldn't be in the position to know your duties. So you always need, why? Because maxims have the same, so they have a form. They have a form of generality. Every maxim has a form of generality. But the idea is, Kant introduces two different words for generality. I mean, Allgemeinheit and something else at some point. The idea is, maxims have a form, but desires haven't a form. So if you cannot check something which has no form, if it supplies to a form. So if you have something formless, you cannot ask, has it a form of a moral law? Because it's formless. But if you put something which as such is just content, matter, namely the desire, in a form which is a maxim, then you can look up the form of the maxim, whether or not it has the same form as a moral law, you see. And the difference is strict necessity. So generality is such as not enough. It must be generality in the highest form, without any exception. Therefore, it's not allowed even to lie once, because it's not just a rule, it's the highest form of the rule. Okay, and there was something very, very important missing, but I can't remember.
Could I ask you to explain the notion of white obligation?
White obligation, that's an important, good question. White obligation. If there's a white obligation, there's also a narrow obligation. A narrow obligation means that there is no playroom left for your own choices. Narrow means I want you to leave this room. And if it is a narrow obligation, there's no room for discussion. There's no way of saying, oh, well, maybe later. No, now you have to leave now. And the idea is here that it says there is no playroom for your own choices in the doctrine of right. There's a public law, and the law says you have to pay your taxes and there's no choice arguing and saying, well, maybe not today, maybe tomorrow I pay my taxes. If there's a law you have to pay in the middle of the month, there's no, at least in Germany. But maybe it's there. So in Germany it's a narrow, in Russia it was a narrow application. Otherwise people come and will sanction. So there is a play room in terms of what is Kant talking here in the groundwork of applying the duties, of applying them. That is to say, because you know the world is complicated and things are changing, and the world in Brazil is different from the world in Argentina and in the US or in Italy or whatever. So you have to look at the empirical facts more attentively than with regard to the juridical laws, which are very clear, so to speak. A wide obligation doesn't mean that there might not exist an obligation. So the obligation exists. There is the obligation that you should perfect yourself. And this is, so to speak, for sure. There is no wide or narrow. That's for certain that you have this obligation. It's not that Kant means wide obligation means, oh, maybe I don't have that obligation. No, you have that obligation. But the application of this obligation has a field of application. You can say, okay, yesterday I had a class in English. The day before yesterday it was Latin. The day before yesterday it was Greek. Today is German. And tomorrow it's Sunday. I won't try to perfect myself. Tomorrow you make the Sunday of your perfection. You can make a rest. It's not that you have to strive for perfection every day. You can make a rest, go to the vineyard, have some drinks. So this is fine. And you have the obligation to help other people in distress, but not every day, not every hour. You are not forced to leave the country to go to, you know, to Africa or to Sao Paulo, to the favelas every day and from the morning to the evening, and you can maybe just spend money. You're not obliged to go there and help people preparing their meals or whatever. So there's a playroom of application. And there's nothing wrong with it. But anyway, you have this obligation. And it's not so easy really to see if this, for instance, also applies for the duty not to lie, for instance. Because normally you would say there's no playground for no power of choice left. You never ever are allowed to lie. And then he discusses in a chapter here on casuistics the question whether or not it might not in certain relation be allowed to lie. Something he not even as a problem mentioned before. And he says, one of the examples I give to my student is when maybe your wife or your husband bought something new and found it very chic and modish and nice, and you ask your husband or your wife, oh, do you like it? And then you are lying. Because you want to have no stress at home. You say, oh yes, very nice, but actually you hate it. You find it ugly or whatever. So is this a lie in the narrow sense of the word, or is this something which is, so to speak, beyond morality? Is it not, does the principle of morality does not apply here? Is it just, so to speak, folklore, as they say? You can discuss about it. Something like that. So this is wide and narrow. So he introduces this, he doesn't have this distinction in the same way introduced here as in the groundwork. In the groundwork he distinguishes between perfect and imperfect duties. In the groundwork is perfect duties are duties which allow no exception. For instance, the duty not to lie against other people is a perfect duty. I'm never allowed to lie against other people, and it's a perfect duty against myself not to commit suicide. There's no way of doing rationally arguing for suicide. But it is an imperfect duty to promote one's own happiness, as they argue in the Doctrine of Virtue, and it's an imperfect duty to promote the happiness of other people. And maybe imperfect applies here, what he means is white, but the white duties here seems to be more duties. Every duty he claims of ethics are white duties. That would mean that even the perfect duties of the groundwork are white duties, and that seems to be a little bit strange. You can write a book. Actually, people have. But it is an obligation, that's for sure. You are bound by pure reason to it. So where we are not. In Kant. 5, 6, happiness of others. And sometimes I say to my student, it's so easy to understand, just read it at all. You know, there are some passages which are really complicated and, you know, you have to discuss it, but there are other passages you just read and you know what it's all about. It doesn't mean to talk about that in more detail.
Question. When Kant speaks about virtue, what is the direct influence the virtue in Middle Age, Christian tradition, or?
It's more Stoicism. There was a revival of Stoicism in Europe in the 17th century, and many people really were struck by Stoic philosophy, different versions of Stoic philosophy, for instance. Maybe the most important book on moral philosophy in the 18th century were written by whom? Who is the author of the most important book on moral philosophy in the 18th century? 100 Platonic euros for that. In the 18th century. No, the most important book for the 18th century, not written for the 18th century. Cicero, De Officiis. This is a standard book, really everybody knows it. Everybody read Cicero. Rousseau, Hume, Kant, Wolff, everybody knows it, at least in Britain, in Germany, I think in France, I understood good in France. But that was really, everybody learned it at school because everybody was forced to learn Latin at school. And this was a basic, so to speak, reading. For instance, Kant, a couple of months ago, I was in the Latin school of the Frankische Stiftung in Halle, and they have, Latin school means that they learn much Latin. And I asked them, it was people, students, maybe they were 13 or 14 years old. I asked them how many hours a week they had Latin, and they said, 7 or 6 hours a week Latin, disgusting, whatever. And I asked him how many hours Kant had at school in Latin. Give me the answer. At least 20. 20 hours a week just doing Latin. 20, 24 hours.
Really?
Yeah.
4 hours.
20, 24. And we really learned it. Not like me. 24 hours. They had Latin, they had Greek, they had a little bit of Hebrew, a little bit of French. The Bible languages, French isn't, but anyway, no English, no Portuguese, no Spanish. German, of course, history, theology, Bible, geography, and that's it more or less. From the morning to the evening. 6 days a week, starting in the morning at 5:30. He was good luck because he didn't live in the school. They started at 5:30, 6 o'clock with morning prayers and singing and all that. And they had people translated the Bible, and they were hours of reflection about their moral progress in terms of whether or not they're good Christians and so on. And they had put that down, and the teacher came in and said, well, not so much good fortune for you, you have to strive harder, and so on. So it really wasn't a nice time.